The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining today's session. We're going to give it another 4 minutes, and we're going to kick things off at 10:05. Good morning. If you're just joining us, we're going to allow another 2 minutes for the last bit of folks to jump on this call. We'll begin promptly at 10:05. All right, we're going to go ahead and get things started. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us this morning to preview the new switch and wireless features in FortiOS 6.4. My name is Soraya Tati, and presenting today is Matt Swanson. And for those of you that don't know, Matt and I, we're part of an overlay team here at Fortinet supporting our switch, our FortiAP, and our FortiExtender. This is our 3G, 4G backup solution. So during these crazy times, my team is working to develop content that is most interesting to you. Our previous webinar explored our remote AP offerings, and if you're interested in viewing this recording, I've included the link in the chat. I've also included my email address, so if there's topics around switch and wireless that you'd like to see more of, we can work to make that happen in future webinars. And due to the large number of attendees and the limited amount of time that we have, we'll be responding to your questions by email. You can put questions in the chat window or email them directly to me. And once the webinar is finished, we'll be sending a recording to all attendees. On a final note, if you're interested in doing a deeper dive into any of these topics, please email me and we'll work with you to schedule an additional GoToMeeting session. Thanks again for jumping on today's webinar. And with that, I'm going to let Matt take it away.
Okay, thank you, Soraya. Welcome, everybody. I just wanted to throw this quick disclaimer up on here. We may mention a couple things that are roadmap products and things like that in this presentation. So some of these things are pre-release and forward-looking, so just make sure that you take that into consideration while viewing this presentation. So we're going to talk about a few things at the top of the presentation today. We're going to walk through some of the new FortiAP models, new FortiSwitch models, and new FortiExtender models that we have either come out with in the last couple quarters or you should see hitting the street in the next 6 months or so. And then after that, we're going to jump in and talk about the new FortiOS 6.4 release and some of the new features that relate to the secure access product portfolio. So first, the product update. Let's talk about FortiAPs first. So many of you that are have been using Fortinet access points for some time probably know that we have a few different product types. So we have wall-jack APs that are great for remote users. Soraya kind of talked about at the beginning. We have a great remote access solution for work-at-home employees and things like that. Those wall-jack APs are a perfect fit for those. Outdoor APs, and then our standard office indoor APs in many different flavors and form factors, internal, external antennas. The main thing on the new products that are coming out are the ability to support the Wi-Fi 6 standard. So that's the 802.11ax that people have been talking about for the last year or so. All of our new products that are coming out here in 2020 are going to be supporting that AX standard. Currently, we have the AX standard supported in our Universal series, but you'll see in the next few weeks to few months that many additional products are going to launch for the standard FortiAP line. So that'll include the flagship AP, our 431 and 433, which is 4x4 MIMO AP, 231, which is a 2x2 MIMO, and then some outdoor capable access points in that line as well. One of the main things that you'll notice with the AX APs is many of them are going to include a third radio in addition to the two radios that we've been including on our access point line for quite some time. And we'll go into that here in a couple slides. So this is a very similar slide as the last one. This is our Universal series of APs. So this line of access points will work with any of our platforms. So either the Fortinet, FortiGate managed APs or Wi-Fi controller, the standalone FortiWLC controller, or they can be managed via FortiCloud. And this is currently the only access point that we have that is Wi-Fi 6 capable. That's our 431F and 433F, but we will be rounding out that product line in the near future. So I mentioned the three radios that we have on the Wi-Fi 6 APs. You're going to have some options for how you can deploy that third radio. So typically, and the way that these APs are going to operate out of the box when you first plug them in and they get discovered by a FortiGate is that radio 1 will be your 5 gigahertz radio for servicing your client-facing SSIDs. Radio 2 will be your 2.4 gigahertz radio for servicing client SSIDs. And then the third radio will be set in a dedicated scanning mode. So this will be a radio that's dedicated to scanning for rogue APs, Wi-Fi intrusions, and those types of attacks that we see on Wi-Fi networks. The way that we've done it in the past is we have used one of the radios on the AP to also do scanning in addition to servicing clients. So the addition of this third radio is just going to increase the performance on the APs. You'll notice here that we also have the capability to operate the two radios in 5 gigahertz mode, so you can have dual 5 gigahertz service. This is very handy in high density situations where you might have, a stadium or a convention center, an auditorium space where you have many clients trying to access the wireless network, and having multiple 5 gigahertz radios is really going to assist in those high density situations. Moving right along to FortiSwitch. So not a lot of changes here on the FortiSwitch side. The main thing to keep in mind is many of our switches are going from the D series to the E series. And the main thing there is it's just the hardware components that we were sourcing to build the D series switches are no longer available. So it's really just a hardware change. None of the functionality is really different. We did come out with the 1048E switch. So this is an all fiber-based switch. It has a bunch of 10 gig interfaces, and then it has uplinks that are capable of either 6 40 gig interfaces or 4 100 gig interfaces, and that's a configurable option. And one other change is, in the past, if you were using those high-speed interfaces, so our switches, maybe the ones that support 40 gig interfaces, you could split those out into 4 10 gigs, but those split ports were not available for FortiLink uplinks. That has been fixed now, so if you have those situations where you need to use those split ports for uplinks, you have that capability now. We do have a few new switches coming out here. So the 100 series, we have a 148E and a 148E PoE. So these are really just high density PoE and non-PoE switches, low cost models for access. They do not support some of the features like MC lag and some of the more higher end features for cores and chassis. We also have the 3000 series. That's the 3032E, has 32 ports of 100 gigs. So great for top of rack applications and data center type applications. In the 400 series, we have a multi-gig switch. So this is our M426E FPoE. That switch has 16 ports of 1 gig copper, and those are all PoE plus ports. It has 8 ports of 2.5/1 gig multi-gig ports. Those support universal PoE, and then it has 2 5 gig uplink ports as well as 4 SFP plus based ports. And then finally, we have a low-cost 1 gig fiber aggregation switch. This is something that we had been missing for a while. If you needed to do a lot of fiber aggregation and it was all 1 gig fiber, we didn't really have a switch for that. You had to go up to our 1000 series. So this kind of just rounds out the portfolio with a 1 gig fiber aggregation. All right, now with FortiExtender. So our current, this FX201E is now currently shipping. This replaces our FortiExtender 40D models. The main difference on this FortiExtender versus the previous FortiExtenders that we've had in the past is that this one includes a switch. So this comes in handy for a couple different aspects of the FortiExtender solution. So when you're using the FortiExtender as an LTE interface for SD-WAN applications using FortiGate, if you had your FortiGates in HA, we didn't have a very good way to plug that FortiExtender into 2 different FortiGates simultaneously, since it only had one Ethernet interface. So adding that switch in the back allows us to have that capability to plug into multiple FortiGates simultaneously and have seamless failover on the LTE interface. That switch also comes in handy if you're using that FortiExtender in a standalone mode. So the FortiExtender can be a standalone kind of office in a box solution. You can set up a little network on those switches, plug your devices into it, and have the FortiExtender make a VPN connection back to the corporate office, either over the WAN port or the LTE connection. And you could have your phones, your PCs, and things like that for a pop-up office or a small remote location. So that wraps up the product overview portion of the presentation. We're going to jump in now and start talking about the new features that are available in FortiOS 6.4 as related to the secure access product portfolio. So the first feature I'm going to mention is a new method of switch controller quarantine. So in 6.2, we had the capability to quarantine devices based on an indicator of compromise. So when the FortiGate security fabric was able to determine that a device was compromised, that the FortiGate would have the capability to automatically quarantine that device by taking that device off of the existing VLAN that they're on and flipping them over to a quarantine VLAN. That VLAN could be a black hole that goes nowhere. That VLAN could have a captive portal attached to it that let the user know that they had been quarantined and they needed to contact the help desk. That feature worked very well and did what it was supposed to do, but there were some issues with it. The main issue was that that new VLAN assignment for the user would trigger a new IP address assignment. And that made it more difficult for system administrators to track that client as they moved from one VLAN to the next and figure out who they were and what the compromise was on that device. So now in 6.4, you still have the capability to go in and you can change it in 6.4 to still do the quarantine by VLAN, but the new default behavior is going to be a quarantine by redirect. So when a device is quarantined, and this quarantine, I mentioned the automation where the FortiGate security fabric through that indicator of compromise can automate that quarantine, but a system administrator can also simply click on a device and quarantine it from a few different spots within the FortiGate GUI. When that happens, a firewall address object is going to automatically be created for that user, and for that device, and that device is going to be moved to another device group, and that group is automatically created for you as well. And that group is called quarantined devices. Now that that device is sitting in that quarantined devices group, a firewall policy needs to be added to apply to that quarantine device group and block any traffic originated from that quarantine device. So in this method, the user is going to remain on their existing VLAN, but they're just going to be blocked at the FortiGate level from communicating with anything. And they'll maintain their IP address and allow an administrator to easily track that device down and figure out what they need to do to remediate the issue that's been found on that device. Next feature is new wireless dashboards. So this is something where in 6.2 and previous releases of FortiOS, there were a few different menus that you could go and look to view wireless statistics. So there was a section under the Wi-Fi logs, and you could go to the monitor and report section, and there were a few different widgets that you could click into. It was a little bit disjointed, and an administrator kind of had to click around into many different menus in order to access, what they wanted to do and jump around through a few different things if they were trying to correlate between different menus. So what we've done in 6.4 is we've taken all of those different Wi-Fi menus and Wi-Fi dashboards that were in different parts of the FortiGate GUI, and we collapsed them all into a new Wi-Fi dashboard. That dashboard is easily found. You just go to dashboard and then Wi-Fi, and you'll be able to see all of the different Wi-Fi widgets right in that single dashboard. This dashboard can be completely customizable, so you can add widgets, delete widgets, move them around, resize them. And the great thing is you can actually drill down into any of these widgets to view more detail. So if I wanted to drill in on my interfering APs, for instance, I could drill into that and it would show me a list of all of the interfering APs, what their signal strength was, what APs on my network were hearing those APs, etc. Other widgets that you can include are rogue APs, clients over time, FortiAP status, failed login attempts. So there's probably about 10 to a dozen widgets that you can mix and match to get an overall picture of the Wi-Fi health on your Wi-Fi network. One other great change in 6.4 is the addition of RF spectrum analysis. So there are spectrum analysis options available now both in the GUI and the CLI. This functionality is only available on our E series and F series access points. So if you've got older access points in the environment, those aren't going to support this new functionality. One of the things to note when you are doing any of the spectrum analysis, any radios that you want to use to monitor the spectrum have to be set to a dedicated monitor mode. So this can be done either by going into the AP profile of that device and changing it, or drilling into an individual AP and doing an override of that of the radio mode right there. From your Manage FortiAP screen, you can click on the AP that is set to do the spectrum analysis, and there's a View Details button. When you click on that, you'll see a few additional tabs are available now. So one of those tabs is the Spectrum Analysis tab. That's going to open up a few options for you, so you can choose which band you would like to view the spectrum analysis for, so either 2.4 gigahertz or 5 gigahertz. You can choose the range of channels that you want to view the spectrum analysis for. And then you can also choose if you'd like to view the graph by the megahertz or by the channels themselves. Once you have that and it's enabled, it's going to start displaying the spectrum analysis spectrograms for signal interference, duty cycle, and then one of the real cool things is at the bottom of that list there, it's going to show detected interference devices. And based on the RF signature of those devices, we're going to do our best to classify them. So be able to tell whether it's a microwave oven, a cordless phone, a Bluetooth controller, any of those types of devices, we can classify them so that you have an easier time of going around to in your environment to trying to find those devices so that they stop interfering with your network. I do want to point out this is something that it's typically used as a troubleshooting tool. So it's probably not necessary to have a dedicated access point that's always doing this spectrum analysis. It really would come in handy when you're troubleshooting and trying to find out, what the duty cycle is on particular channels, what type of interference sources you have, if you're troubleshooting those types of issues. Okay, so this is a great feature that we've been asking for a long time, and it's great that the FortiOS team finally was able to deliver it to us. So in the past, we had our Wi-Fi clients monitor that had some really good information on it, but it left a little to be desired. So you could go into that Wi-Fi client monitor and view the IP address of any of your Wi-Fi connected users. If they logged on to the Wi-Fi using 802.1x, we'd be able to see their authenticated username, what AP they're connected to, what their current signal to noise ratio is, all really great information to have for a Wi-Fi administrator when troubleshooting. But you really didn't have any more capability than just viewing the information on that screen. You didn't have any ability to go in and see what type of applications that user was hitting, what policies they were hitting on the firewall. With 6.4, we do have that capability now. So we have a lot of additional options on the Wi-Fi clients monitor where you are able to go in and drill down into any of those clients and view a bunch of FortiView information. So if you wanted to see what applications are in use by that particular client, what destinations they're going to, what policies they're hitting on the firewall. There's also a logs tab, which will filter down to the specific Wi-Fi logs related to that client. So it's a really nice tool for troubleshooting. You don't have to kind of remember what all those filters are. It just does it for you, and you can see all the related messages for that user. We also show you a graph, little line graphs for bandwidth and signal to noise ratio over time, which really come in handy when troubleshooting as well. Two other options that we didn't have on the screen before were the quarantine and disassociate options. So I mentioned that you've got the ability to quarantine from many places within the FortiGate GUI. This is just one of them. So if you were troubleshooting something and noticing that you had a bad actor on the network, you could immediately quarantine that device and kick them off the network. All right, this is another addition in 6.4. This is our VLAN probe tool. So oftentimes when deploying Wi-Fi APs, If you've got your SSIDs set to a bridge mode where the AP is broadcasting an SSID, and when a user connects to that SSID, when their traffic is leaving the AP and dropping onto the wire, the access point adds the VLAN tag that is associated with that SSID, and then the switch knows what to do with it. Sometimes we deploy our SSIDs onto an access point, and then for whatever reason, a client either isn't getting an IP address or they're getting connected, but they're ending up on the wrong VLAN. Those types of issues can happen. So this VLAN probe tool is a nice addition to be able to go in, and this is going to be on a per AP basis. You go into an AP, click on the VLAN probe tool tab, and set your range for what VLAN IDs you want to probe for. Click the start button, and the AP is going to start probing to see if it has access on any of those VLANs in that range. After it's done doing its scan, it's going to show you a little table that shows any of the VLANs that the AP was able to discover that it has access to. So that way you're able to see, oh, I had my staff SSID is supposed to drop users onto VLAN 20, but that VLAN is not available on the port that the AP is plugged into. I need to go to my switch and make sure that the configuration is correct. So nothing earth-shattering here, but just a nice tool for those situations when you're kind of in a jam and wondering why a user is either not getting connected or getting connected onto the wrong VLAN. Okay, this is one of my favorite new features. This is a switch-related feature. So in the past, when you were on the Managed FortiSwitch topology page, and you were looking at all your switches and how they were interconnected, we had some color coding of the lines that would show how, port 22 on one switch was connected to port 47, and you draw circles around the ports, and it was, it was nice. You could, trace the lines and figure out how things were interconnected. In larger switch networks, it got to be a little bit more of an eye chart and harder to follow because, maybe you had 4 different shades of green lines on there, and it was hard to figure out which one was going to which port. So we've made some changes in 6.4 to kind of clean some of that up. So now on the main FortiView topology screen here, we're going to collapse those switches. So instead of showing the faceplate with every single port, we are going to kind of collapse that view and show you just how the individual switches are interconnected to one another. We also are doing some cool things with multi-chassis lag. So in 6.2 and previous, when you had 2 switches that were in a multi-chassis lag sharing MAC table, they're being one logical switch. We didn't do a very good job of depicting what that FortiLink ICL inter-chassis link was. So that's been changed now. Now that MC-lag ICL link is that kind of bright blue color between the 2 switches, and there's a legend on the bottom left that kind of explains what the different color-coded lines mean. And we also drew a box, you can kind of see it in gray, around those 2 switches. It says MC-lag at the top of the box. That's depicting that those 2 switches are MC-lag peers, and they're all acting as one. Another really nice thing that we did is we added a yellow line, and you can kind of see it on here. There's a little yellow line with a yellow circle with a slash through it. That is an indicator that that is a link that is in STP blocking state. And if you hover over any of those links, it's going to show you some information about the ports on both sides of the link. So we see, port 20 on the one switch is the one that's discarding, and port 10 on the other side of the link is still forwarding. So a lot of nice changes there. I'm trying to see if there's anything else. No, I think that's good for this slide. So another new FortiSwitch feature is the ability to build out FortiSwitch groups. So in the past, when you had a bunch of FortiSwitches that were all being managed by your FortiGate, they would all just show up in one big list on the Managed FortiSwitch screen. And if you had, some switches on floor 1 and some switches on floor 2, and maybe some in a different closet, there was not really a good way to group those switches together. So that's been fixed in 6.4. You do now have the ability to build out groups of switches, and there's a little drop down where if you want to see the switches in just a pure list view, or if you want to see them in the group view, you can select that at the top, and then you can build out logical groups of your switches. So by floor, by closet, whatever grouping classification you need to do. Switches can be members of multiple groups. So if you wanted to have all the switches on floor 3 in the floor 3 group, but then have 3 different groups for the 3 different closets on floor 3, you can make that happen in the grouping. Okay, so this one is another one of my favorite features in 6.4 for secure access, and it's the ability to build out integrated NAC policies directly on the FortiGate without having to have any external radius server, any external network access controller. Everything's done directly on the FortiGate itself. So essentially, there's a few different steps that you need to do to make this work. You need to build out a onboarding VLAN. So that's the VLAN that devices are going to connect to when they first plug into a switch port, for instance. And then you can build out from there whatever NAC policies that you need. So these NAC policies can be they're all based on device classification. So we're going to do some detection on devices when they connect to the network. We're going to try and figure out, what their hardware, who the hardware vendor is, what operating system they're running, what's the class of device. And we're using FortiGuard Labs for a lot of this. So one of the new things in 6.4 is a much more extensive list of especially IoT devices. So, IP-based clocks and scales, and you name it, any of those IoT devices, many of them are starting to come onto the network, and it's been very challenging to classify those devices and onboard them. Many of them don't support 802.1x, so having some sort of a network access control is imperative for automating the onboarding process for those devices, and this is really going to help you do that. So we're going to classify that device based on any of those different categories, and then based on that category, we can do one of two things. We can either dynamically assign a VLAN to that device. So in this example, I was looking for any Apple devices, and I'm automatically going to drop them onto my data VLAN. You could also, if you didn't want to dynamically assign a VLAN, you could do automatic port settings. So apply an LLDP profile, apply a QoS policy to a phone, for instance. Apply a 802.1x policy on the fly for, maybe you recognize a IoT device and you want to do MAC authentication bypass on your 802.1x, for instance. So lots of flexibility here, a lot of power in this solution to be able to classify those devices and then automate how they go, where they go on the network. This allows the ability to do what we've been calling the universal port configuration, where you don't really have to do any configuration on the ports. We let the NAC controller and the kind of radius stuff in the background do all the assignment for you. Whether you're a phone or you're a wireless AP, all that stuff will kind of be plug and play using this feature. You may have seen some of this starting to come into play in 6.2. We added some additional VLANs automatically when you enable the switch controller. So you might have seen a voice VLAN, 40 camera VLAN, and those VLANs are there to be able to take advantage of this feature, so that when we have a Fortinet voice over IP phone come onto the network, we're going to automatically recognize that as a Forti phone and dynamically drop them into the voice VLAN. So a few additional features that we have in 6.4, VLAN interface templates for switches. So this gives you the ability to build out a template for a Forti switch. So when right now in 6.2, when you plug in a FortiSwitch, it comes online and all of its ports are set to VLAN 1. Using this VLAN interface template, you're going to be able to set up a template so that when any new FortiSwitches come online, maybe you don't want them all to be set to VLAN 1 by default. You want them all to be on VLAN 10, or you want ports 1 through 12 to be VLAN 10, but ports 13 through 24 to be on VLAN 20. You can build that out in a template, and then whenever a FortiSwitch comes online, it'll just adopt that template, so you don't need to go in and manually make those configuration changes. We're also doing wireless IPv6 support for wireless clients. So this was something where we didn't support that in the past. This works on both bridge mode and tunnel mode SSIDs. So if you have IPv6 on your internal networks, we do not support it on our wireless. Many of the FortiGate models have an increased number of switches and APs that are supported. I was trying to build a chart that kind of showed how this, what these numbers were going to be, but it kind of turned into an eye chart. So just be cognizant of the data sheet. Some of the existing platforms that you have, like the 200, for example, is a good example of that. It has, I think, twice as many switches and twice as many APs are able to be managed on that unit now. And then different models have different formulas for how they've increased. So just kind of keep an eye on the data sheet for that, but be aware that when you do upgrade, some of your existing FortiGates will have increased capacity for switches and APs. So this even distribution of FortiAP reports, we had an issue in the past where when our APs were updating the controller with wireless statistics about signal to noise ratios, interference, that kind of stuff, all of the APs were updating the controller simultaneously, and it was putting more of a strain on the memory in the FortiGate than was necessary. So they've just kind of evened that out now so that the APs don't all report at the same time. They stagger that so that we be cognizant of the resources on the FortiGate as much as possible. FortiAP load balancing change. So basically, we have two load balancing options for your Forti access points. So the first option is frequency handoff. This option is more commonly referred to in the Wi-Fi world as band steering. So this is trying to force any 5 gigahertz capable clients onto the 5 gigahertz radio where we've got more bandwidth, less interference, all good stuff for Wi-Fi. And then we also have a load balancing feature that will load balance across multiple APs. So for instance, if you have a auditorium that the number of clients that you're going to have in that auditorium will exceed just a single AP from being able to support it. Oftentimes what will happen is clients will walk in and maybe there's an AP right above the door. Everybody will connect to that AP, and then there's not enough signal differential inside of that room to force a client to roam from one access point to the next. So, maybe you've got one AP that's extremely busy and 5 APs in that room that are sitting there kind of idle. Our AP load balancing feature will load balance clients across multiple APs in that one area to give everyone the best performance possible. Those settings were a per radio setting in previous releases, which did not really make sense because in order for the feature to work, you did need to enable them on both radios. So there were 4 checkboxes that you needed to check. It was a little bit cumbersome. Those settings now have just been moved. They're still in the AP profile, but they're not in the individual radio settings. So you just have one checkbox to check for frequency handoff and one for AP handoff. But just be aware that if you're deploying a new network and you're used to those checkboxes being under the radios, they're going to be in a different spot now. We're also going to be supporting now ACL configurations directly on FortiAPs. So this is another one that's going to come into play if you're using bridge mode access points. And those APs are bridging traffic directly onto a switch port. And you wanted to build out an ACL on that AP to disallow certain networks from talking to other networks. You can build those ACLs now directly on those FortiAPs. Auto firmware upgrade for incoming AP. So right now, when you plug an AP in to your FortiGate or to your network infrastructure, and that AP gets discovered, and you authorize it, it comes online in your FortiGate. And oftentimes you'll notice that there's an AP firmware mismatch between the existing APs that you have deployed and the new APs that are just coming online. In 6.4 now, we have the capability to do an auto firmware upgrade for any incoming APs. So that gives you the ability to upload a FortiAP firmware into your FortiGate, and you set it so that whenever a new AP is discovered, it'll automatically just upgrade it to that firmware level. So this is just a great way to make sure that all your FortiAPs within your infrastructure are all on the same firmware level, which makes things a little bit easier for troubleshooting. WID's AP scan threshold. So in the past, we were really just looking at anything that we could see. We didn't care about if something was a very weak signal, we were still going to look at it and log it. Oftentimes that was adding a lot of extraneous information into the logs, things that were very far away from you that weren't really affecting your wireless network were showing up in those logs. So now you have the ability to go in to your WIDS profile and set a scan threshold so that we'll ignore certain events if they're below a certain signal. So that does it for the new features in FortiOS 6.4 related to secure access. I don't know, I think we've got some time still. Sarai, do we want to open it up for questions?
Sure, we can absolutely do that. We had some questions come in on the chat, and I tried to respond to them, but maybe, Matt, you can take a swing at them and provide a little more detail. Do you want to start there?
Sure, yeah. Yeah, looks like there's maybe a dozen questions. I can start running through them.
Perfect.
So the first one here is there a reason at this point that all new switches don't have at least 10G uplinks? Yeah, I mean, we still do have a lot of customers that don't require any 10 gig on their network. So in order to just keep prices as low as possible for those particular deployments, we still do have some switches out there that only support 1 gig. You're right, though. You're going to see pretty much any new switch that we come out with in the future is the minimum uplink port that we're going to have on them are 10 gig. So that just has kind of slowly been coming down the product line. So our 1000 series, 500 series, and 400 series have always supported 10 gig. We're going to have some 10 gig interfaces on the 200 series models, and I've heard rumors even on the 100 series in the future. So we still have the ones that are available today, but probably in the future, everything's going to be 10 gig capable. Roadmap for 5G. So this is related to the FortiExtender. I don't believe we have anything for 5G slated for this year. It's really going to be 2021 that all the 5G FortiExtenders are going to start to hit the street. I think we are. Yes, we will make the slides available. Are you going to send the whole recording out to people, Soraya, or?
Yeah, I was thinking we can send the recording along with a link to the slides.
Perfect. Yep. Andy Grunin, I'll circle back with you. I'm not sure about your question. So Andy asked a question: will that quarantine by redirect feature also place that device on something like a private VLAN so that other devices on the same layer 2 subnet can't be contacted by that device? I'm not sure about that. I'll have to look into that feature a little bit closer to see if that is happening behind the scenes as well. So yeah, do our switches support stacking? So all of our switches, we don't have any proprietary stack ports or stack cables that we use, but all of our switches can be stacked using whatever high-speed interfaces are available on that particular switch. And then they all show up in a virtual stack, all managed and controlled from a configuration and management standpoint from the single IP address of the FortiGate. Can we share this info with key customers? Yeah, all this information is publicly available. So this presentation is going to be made available. I think Soraya is going to put it, we have a SWAT YouTube channel that this presentation will be available on. She's going to send out the recording to you guys, so feel free to share it with any of your prospects and customers. And then in addition to that, there's some great 6.4 documentation on the Fortinet documentation site. So docs.fortinet.com. If you go to the FortiOS section, there's a what's new in 6.4 document, and there's a secure access section that has additional information and detail about all of these features that we talked about today. So that's a great resource for you. All right, any plans for a 10G Ethernet switch? Yes, we do have a 10G Ethernet switch on the roadmap. I'd need to check to find out when that is slated for. I don't have that information right in front of me, but we can follow up with you on that. All right, is the FortiSwitch a mature enough product for a data center? Yeah, definitely. We've got FortiSwitches going into data centers all over the place. Soraya just had a very large deal with a very large data center colo company closed last quarter. So yeah, definitely a great play for data centers. There are certain data center specific protocols that we don't support. So maybe we can take that conversation offline, but for most day-to-day stuff, FortiSwitch is a great play. Will the auto upgrade feature be applied to FortiSwitches? So there are some upgrade automation features that are already built in, but it is more of a manual process. I don't think that this auto upgrade feature is there yet, but that's a good suggestion that I'll take to maybe plug in as a new feature request. We have a question here. Is it recommended to use the SFP ports for stacking versus the regular RJ45? Typically, yes. I mean, they work the exact same way, but if you've got especially our 400 or 500 series switches that have 10 and 40 gig interfaces on them, those are typically what we recommend using for the stacking and for your uplinks. Do we have roadmap for a switch with more than 8 multi-gig ports? Not currently, we do not. Our switch is easy to manage with FortiManager. Yeah, so a lot of the stuff that I talked about today, or all the stuff that I talked about today with respect to FortiSwitches and FortiAPs was directly managing them on the FortiGate. But if you do have FortiManager and you're using FortiManager to manage a bunch of FortiGates, it is very easy to manage switches and APs from that FortiManager as well. There are a couple modules within FortiManager that you'll notice. So one of them is the FortiAP Manager, and one of them is the FortiSwitch Manager. That's where you would go to do any of your configuration changes. So adding SSIDs for the Wi-Fi side, making adjustments to the AP profiles, adding FortiSwitch VLANs, building out templates for how those VLANs are going to be applied to FortiSwitch ports. All that stuff is really nicely done within FortiManager. When a FortiGate has switches and APs that are being managed by that FortiGate, there's nothing extra that you need to do in FortiManager to get those switches and APs to show up. They just will automatically show up as devices. And one other thing I like to mention with FortiManager, it's licensed by device, but that only counts FortiGates and FortiGate VDOMs. Any switches and APs that are behind any FortiGates are not counted against that list or against that license limit. So any idea when we'll support more of a traditional stacking technology versus spanning tree between switches and locations like an IDF? Yeah, so what we do with that now is we can do multi-chassis lag. And with that multi-chassis lag, we have some topologies where we can eliminate spanning tree and make everything just active links throughout the environment. If you want to talk more, a little bit more about that, we can take that conversation offline. FortiManager 6.4, I think that's supposed to come out this week. Usually it's just a couple weeks delayed after the 6.4 FortiOS release comes out. But yeah, for FortiManager 6.4 to be able to support 6.4 endpoints, that's going to be coming here any day now. So a recommendation for a number of devices to start utilizing FortiManager. It's kind of different for everyone. I think usually, once you get to be around, 5 or 6 FortiGates, especially if they have a similar configuration, FortiManager comes in very handy. And Jose asked, do FortiSwitches have dual partitions like the FortiGates in the event that an update fails? I am not sure about that. I will have to follow up with you offline, Jose. So how seamless is a FortiGate HS upgrade process on the FortiSwitches and FortiAPs? Upgrading from the FortiGate is very simple. So you'll see on the dashboard, so either on the managed AP screen or on the managed switches screen, if you have older firmware on any of those devices, that will be indicated in the GUI. So we're using FortiGuard Labs to kind of keep the FortiGate updated with any new firmware that's available. So you'll see that firmware is sitting there ready to go. It's really just point and click on the devices. You can do multi-selects if you want to push the upgrade to all the APs simultaneously, or half the APs, you can do that. So from the GUI, it's really just point and click to deploy those upgrades. Once you hit the deploy button, the firmware is going to get pulled down from FortiGuard Labs, automatically pushed down to the device that you're upgrading. It'll go through its process and come back online with the new firmware. Okay, I think that does it for the questions.
Awesome. Well, thank you again, Matt, and thanks everybody for attending today's webinar. We'll be sure to send a follow-up email containing links to the slide as well as a recording of this. And for those questions that we have follow-up items on, we'll get back to you shortly. Again, if there's any topic that you're wanting to do a deeper dive into, please feel free to reach out to me and we can schedule some time to review with you. Thank you again, and hope everybody is staying safe and most importantly, sane. Take care.